should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Good morning. You know, when I got into hobbies like D&D, I didn't really care like what people outside of the hobby thought of what I was doing. It was nice to have people taking an interest in the things that I was interested in, provided that they did so of their own free will, like they were just interested in it, like they just had something that drew them towards it. But I didn't care if it became mainstream. I didn't care if it became popular, because it wasn't a matter of social approval. It wasn't a matter of like, you know, something is cool because a lot of people like it. But I think that most people do believe that. They think that an interest or hobby is more valid if more people are also interested in it. And I'm not saying this to be like a hipster contrarian. You know, I don't go out of my way to look for niche things either, because that's its own kind of social game, right? Like there are people who specifically try to find stuff that no one else is into, and then they get into it, and then they think they're being a rebel, but they're not, because it's a different kind of conformity. You're just choosing explicitly to go after something that no one else is into just because of where it sits in the social acceptance landscape. Like, oh, you know, no one else likes this thing, so I'm going to like this thing. That's not why. I just like it for the content. I like it for what it is. If it became popular, whatever. If it didn't, who cares, right? That's it. Like, it's as simple as that. Now, I said all that because I think that as things like Dungeons and Dragons have become more mainstream, the danger, of course, is that that don't actually know anything about it, or they don't care to. They use it again as a tool of social approval or social upheaval, or it's just another way for them to live out their narcissistic fantasies and their strange fetishes and all of their personal shit, right? It's that's what it's about. Like, there are people who think that they're so important that anything they get involved with, whatever it might be, no matter the interest, it has to be about them. And I wanted to put this on the main like Honey Badger live streams channel, but because it is kind of niche, I wasn't sure if the audience would be interested. So I at least wanted to talk about it in some capacity. So I'm talking about it online. So if you're here from Badger, like Honey Badger Discord or something, I appreciate that you're showing up. So, but, okay. So let's get something straight. Culture matters. It's actually really important. This is why SJWs and leftists attack culture. Okay? Leftists attack culture. Leftists control culture. They dominate culture because they use culture as a means by which to change people's attitudes about things. And they do it to also sort of engineer people's belief systems. So let's look at it like this. If you guys are watching me, you know that feminism as an ideology is a grift. It's a scam. It's a lie. Nothing about it is true. And it never was true. There was never a time where it was good. So if we can accept that, if we can accept that it was always a lie, and it never had good intentions as a set of ideas, and it only existed for social upheaval purposes, to divide people and to create a class of people who would get special treatment, while another class of people would essentially be seen as the perpetrators of oppression, right? That is the scam, okay? Then it would follow that every other, like, narrative of oppression, and yeah, I'm going to go there, that includes racism, That includes classism. That includes the phobias. That includes everything, okay? All of those conversations that are happening in the leftist framework of oppressors and oppressed, of those with power and those without, all of those are scams. All of them. Full stop, 100%. Am I saying that bigots don't exist? No, I'm not talking about that, because feminists are not talking about actual misogyny in their work either, right? It's a scam, okay? But I think that if you were to really, really take a moment to really think about what the arguments are that are being made when it comes to any kind of isms or phobias or whatever, very, very few are actual legitimate cases. In fact, I think that it's something like probably 90 something percent of the claims require a leap of logic, a leap of faith, if you will, in order to actually see them that way. And on top of that window, that leap, it's ever expanding. For example, why do you think that SJWs say that we have to make Mr. Potato Head gender neutral? Do you think they care about trans children? Do you think that they actually believe that if a child has a Mr. Potato Head, that they're going to somehow deny themselves a transition later in life? No, it's a scam. Like, these people are not dumb. They're not logically inconsistent because they're not interested in consistency. Pointing out their hypocrisy, pointing out where they're wrong, is a meaningless exercise. It makes you feel smarter because you get to say, oh, look how dumb they are. SJWs are dumb, am I right? Look, they're saying this about Mr. Potato Head. Look, they're saying, and I swear to God, I saw this and I knew it was coming. They're saying that being a gay or lesbian is transphobic because it presumes that there is a gender that is just like your gender that you would be attracted to, right? This is legitimately shit that they're saying. They believe that white supremacy is literally anything that white people do. Wearing clothes is white supremacy. Doing math is white supremacy. Is this because they're dumb? No. It's because they're where the rabbit hole is, where they basically try to control people through these accusations of bigotry. Accusations, by the way, that only work, they can only have any impact in a society that isn't full of bigotry, because that's the only way people would listen. And then they just keep expanding their definitions of bigotry to become ever more all-encompassing. And the reason is basically because they only care about two things. They want to control people, and they'll use any tools to do so that is at their disposal. And they want to burn everything down. They actually are nihilists that hate their own life. They have no purpose. Nothing they do matters because everything is oppression. And so they want to burn everything down. And if you don't believe me, I can direct you to videos of conversations that woke scolds are having with each other, that leftists are having, and they all are nihilistic about everything, and they just don't give a shit. It is, in fact, an ethos, the ethos of destroying everything. And they're doing it through the culture, through academia, through politics, through medicine, through activism, through everything. And we have to become more vocal. So I'm making this video. And if you're like, because I know people that they avoid this shit, they sit on the fence with this shit, they think it's dumb, they dismiss it. Oh, you know, the SJWs are stupid, whatever, you know. You are not going to win with that attitude. You have to. You have to. You have to confront this shit and you have to call it out. And you have to point out for the people who don't see it happening that this is all bullshit. This is all bullshit. Like, there's no legitimacy at all. Okay? Let me ask you this before I get into this article. And remember, I say culture matters because you use it to influence people. And the left has been doing this for a long time. And I bet that if you think about it, there are probably some ideas that you hold, some notions that you hold, and you're not sure where it came from, but you haven't questioned them. And I'm pretty sure that they came from the left's control of our culture. I'm sure of it. Okay. But let me ask you this. So I was watching a podcast on Jordan Peterson's channel, Jordan B. Peterson, and he had on Jonathan Pajot. And Jonathan Pajot is, I apologize for getting his religion wrong before, his denomination, but he's an Eastern Orthodox man who is an icon carver and an artist. He works on religious carvings and stuff, right? And he talks a lot about symbolism on his channel. Jonathan Pajot he's a great channel. I love his work. I think that it's extremely important stuff. But anyway, he and Peterson were talking, and they were talking about what, like, if we're operating in the world of symbols and myths and narrative structure in terms of like the human experience, which is what they talk about. And again, this is related to culture, because culture is where we're getting our stories, which means it's where we're getting our wisdom from. It's where we're getting our narratives. And the left controls culture. So they control narratives. They control history. They control gender relations. They control narratives around race. They control narratives around capitalism and property, family, you name it, right? So anyway, Peterson was asking, he's like, I don't know what part I have to play. I don't know what character I'm supposed to be, in this narrative sense. And Jonathan was saying, well, because Peterson's in a lot of pain, not just physical pain, but like emotional pain and from all the stuff that he's been through. I mean, the guy has been through stuff that doesn't even make sense, not just like by happenstance with his health issues and such, but like the way that he's been treated by the media. Even after going through all this, he goes on and does an interview and they turn it into a hit piece, right? So he's clearly making enemies. And so Jonathan's like, well, it's like you're standing between two islands and you have 1 foot on one island and 1 foot on another island, and you're trying to keep them from drifting too far apart. Okay. And what he's referring to is extremism. He's basically like, Peterson is trying to prevent extremism, and he's standing in this position that makes enemies on all sides, right? That's what Jonathan Pajot is saying. And at first glance, that seems to make sense. But I disagree with the premise, because I disagree with the premise that Peterson is standing on two islands. And it's not exactly clear that what Pajot is discussing is specifically about political differences, but I'm going to assume that to some degree it is, because if you look at most of Peterson's talks, he has basically he's always been approaching this from that perspective, because even though he's not a political commentator, because he believes in freedom of speech, because he believes that compelled speech is tyranny, and because he cares about men, he's forced into a political conversation. Now, of course, what's interesting is that Peterson, and maybe to a lesser degree Jonathan, although I think if I could talk to him, I think he would probably agree with me, they don't seem to recognize that a conversation about men is political in the eyes of the establishment. And not only that, but it must be opposed at every opportunity, right? But here's where I take issue with his idea of extremism. You can go watch videos from other people. There's a guy named Tik, T-I-K. He does great videos on history, specifically history of World War II and all of the events that led up to it, and many of the events that occurred after it, from the battles to the weaponry to the technology to the political landscape. Okay. You can watch him if you don't trust people like Eric July, also known as Young Ripa, or Razor Fist, or Styx Hexenhammer. But all of them have said this. Tick and all the others, okay? The Nazis were left-wing. That's the fact. They were left-wing. The fascists were left-wing. The communists were left-wing. All of those groups were left-wing, okay? They basically used the state to solve problems. The state controlled the economy and in different ways, but they still were involved, all right? That's why, like, when people say we live in a time of in the United States of basically governments and corporations working together, that's called fascism. It's true. That is fascism. Okay. It's left wing. That's not up for debate. That there's no discussion to be had. That's the truth. Okay. Just because they hated each other doesn't mean that they weren't like coming from the same position. Okay. Now, most people that are discussing all of this, and I mean even some of the smartest ones, and I don't know if it's because they don't know or because they do know and they're being duplicitous, they are operating under a presumption of a false construct of the way in which we view the left and the right. The left is where all the authoritarianism is. That is the purpose of it. It is about putting security over liberty. The right is about putting liberty over security. Now, when I say the right, I don't mean conservative. So don't even go in the comment section telling me about, oh, I know some authoritarian conservatives. Good for you. There are conservatives on the left. It absolutely exists. Conservatism is not even, that's like a whole other, can of worms, basically. But they can be against freedom, or at the very least for, more government control. Islamic governments, that's an example right there. But so on the left is where you have the extremism that Peterson is concerned with, whether you're talking about alt-righters who are in fact leftists because they believe in a socialist state, they just think it should be white, or Black Lives Matter activists who we for some reason accept as leftists, even though their belief system is identical to the alt-right, in which that they believe that there should be a socialist state, but only for black people. So I don't see how those things could be opposites at all. And then you have all the groups that basically want to divide up in different kinds of classes. So the feminists want a utopia where the men are basically slaves to the women through the state, which is actually what we've had to some degree for many, many years. This is the welfare state. Most of the money goes to women and most of the money comes out of the pockets of men. You could basically put it down in any number of different lines. Now, most people involved with these conversations that are leftists, they are basically useful idiots that think that they're making the world a better place because they haven't actually thought this through. Peterson is wrong because, and I think this is why it's stressing him out, because he isn't operating under the correct paradigm of what he's doing. What is the midway point between tyrannical authoritarian leftists and people who just want to be free? What is the middle? That's why I said on my Facebook page, I made a post where I wrote, wanting liberty is the most extreme position that somebody can hold, because it is. And people will hate you for it. Like, it doesn't matter how far the left goes. It doesn't matter if they murder people, which they have, if they engage in election fraud, which they fucking have, if they no matter how much they do, no matter how much damage. In Canada, they're forcing children to isolate from their own parents in their own homes if those children might have COVID. And this is and the parents are doing their bidding. This is the degree to which people have put their faith in the state. So if you go against that, you are their enemy, even of normies. This is why, and of course, the left is really great at constructing a narrative, right? So, if you're against masks, they call you an anti-masker. Well, why? Well, because it sounds like anti-vaxxer. Basically, what it means is you're thinking for yourself. You're not allowed to do that. And that's how they're operating. Anyway, I got a little off base here, but I just wanted to basically say that Peterson's problem is that he is operating in an incorrect paradigm that he may not recognize. And I think that a lot of people don't seem to see this. And I think that some of them are smarter than that. And I think that they're purposefully operating within this sphere so that there is always some degree of government control. But if you want to be free, then you move away from all of those things. Okay. So anyway, going back to so Peterson should basically be siding with people who want to be free, because that'll get you away from BLM, Antifa, commies, Nazis. That'll get you away from all of it, because that's it. Just move towards the people who want to be free, the people who want liberty. And plenty of people do. In fact, well, I wouldn't say most, but I think there's a lot. The problem is that there's also a lot of people that are so dependent on the system, even if it's in some small way, or they don't know what a world with less of the system looks like. It scares them, and they retaliate, sometimes violently, at least angrily. This is why I tell people who are libertarians that believe that they operate on some like third axis outside of this other conversation, that they're sort of above everything, that they're foolish to think that, because number one, they're not. They operate within the paradigm. They're just far right. But number two, more importantly, the libertarians are the target. They're the target. The left is they'll burn down the liberals and the conservatives and the moderates and such. But the libertarians are the real people that they hate the most, because what the libertarians want is actually what is most harmful to what the left wants. And the left will, I mean, they demonize libertarians. Remember when the guy was on, I don't know what news channel it was. It was either MSNBC or CB. It was one of the alphabet networks, right? And he was talking about the insurrection on the 6th. And he was basically saying, yeah, we have to do something about, and then he starts off by saying things like, alt-righters and far right, like, revolutionaries, whatever. He described them as first extreme, or at least as extreme as he was able to frame them. And then he moved towards the center, and then in his mind, and then he ended with even libertarians. But libertarians are the target. So don't forget that, okay? If you are a libertarian or libertarian minded, even if it's social, you are the target, because you stand for everything that the left despises. Okay. So, all right. So let's get back to the article. And if you guys want to, I guess I still can't do super chats for whatever reason, but don't worry. If you guys want to send me something, I have a link to Streamlabs in the description. But I think this is really important. And I know that I said a whole bunch of political stuff, but you guys have to understand the left makes everything political. And they do that because it is the best way for them to eat everything out from the inside. Okay. And they believe that change can only occur through the exercise of power. And that power must come from a source that cannot be competed with. And the one entity in the world, no matter what country you look at, that has the monopoly on the use of power and the use of force is the state. So they will use the state, okay? No matter how big a corporation gets, as long as they're like, they're bound to law, they're not as much of a threat as the state. So anyway, so this is from comicbookresources.com, and it's entitled How Dungeons and Dragons is Working to Eradicate Fantasy Racism. All right. Now, I could go through and point out all of the illogical stuff about this, but you guys have to understand that it's self-evident how illogical everything is, how little sense it makes, and it's kind of irrelevant because, like I said before, the left doesn't care about hypocrisy. They don't care about consistency. They don't care about logic. They believe all those things are a product of white supremacy. They've said it. Okay. So that means that they get to dismiss it. So being like pointing out their flaws or whatever is meaningless. They don't care, right? If they could, they would just murder you and move on, because that's like seriously how they are. I saw this great video. It's like 5 hours long or something. And it was a bunch of, it started out as it's some like app called Clubhouse, right? And there were some intellectuals like Brett Weinstein, for example, that were in there, and they were talking about wokeism in the Clubhouse app. I don't know what it is. I guess it's some kind of social meeting app thing where people can get together and talk and stuff. And a bunch of black activists found out that this meeting was going on, and they jumped in. And they basically like took over, and they kicked a bunch of the white people out, and they forced a bunch of the other ones into I guess it's like a muted state where they can only listen, but they can't talk unless they get permission. And you're allowed to like raise your hand in the meeting, and then the moderator can pick on you, and then you can speak. And they forced them to the back, and then they just ranted about how racist it was that they were even in there challenging the notion of wokeism. And later they allowed Brett Weinstein, because they recognized his name, to speak, right? And but that was after they forced him to or not forced, but they essentially demanded that he come in and pronounce himself anti-racist and anti-transphobic, like and basically like, denounce white supremacy. And it was like he had to make a bunch of confessions or declarations before they allowed him to speak. And Brett went in there and he tried to, this was about 2 hours and 45 minutes in. Brett went in there and he basically started off by saying, well, first of all, I'm not because they said he's a classical liberal. And of course they said that as though it's an insulting thing, which, because it is to them, it is insulting, right? They can't stand liberals, guys. That's why they're not liberals. They never were. Leftists are not liberals. Liberals are a completely different animal. Okay. Stop calling. In fact, I say stop calling yourself a classical liberal. Don't even bother. Just say you're a liberal. It's okay. The left isn't liberal. Why do they get to own that word? Just call yourself a liberal. I'm a liberal. So anyway, so they said, oh, he's a classical liberal, like it's basically supposed to be dismissive. And he said, I am in no way a classical liberal. I am a leftist. I am far left. Yes, Brett Weinstein admitted to it. And I knew that because I said it before. I said that he is a product of the monster that he created. And I was right, by the way. And so he basically tried to throw classical liberals under the bus in an effort to like start a conversation with them by saying, I am not one of them. I'm one of you. And then he goes on to talk about how he doesn't think that he qualifies as white because he's Jewish, and Jewish people have been, persecuted by Europeans for, and he basically is trying to put himself on their level. But it doesn't matter. And this is my point. You can throw white people under the bus if you want. You can throw liberals under the bus, if you think that it's going to allow you to get like some common ground with leftists. But the fact is, leftists, they don't like you because they don't like each other, because they don't like themselves. Okay, so at this point, it doesn't matter what you say. And this only shows that Brett is a coward, which he is. I don't care how smart he is. I don't care how reasonable people think he is. He's a piece of shit. He's a coward. Stop following him. Okay? Think for your fucking self. Fuck that guy. Because he couldn't even stand, like, you have to stand up. Look, having compassion for people, caring about justice, caring about right and wrong, is meaningless if you don't do it for people who you have the least amount of cause to do that for, right? So the people who might seem to be the least deserving are the people that you should be doing that for. Okay? So he doesn't have the courage to do that. So fuck him. But more than that, my main point was trying to appeal to the left, trying to rationalize with them, trying to talk to them. It's a exercise in futility. Don't bother. Okay? Stop wasting your time, and just for the people who are on the fence or they don't know a lot about it or whatever, try to help them understand that if they are just liberals, that they have no allegiance to the left. And if you make clear to them, because here's another problem, and this is why I think Eric and Brett Weinstein are duplicitous snakes as well. They're far left, and their main concern, no matter how much damage the left does, no matter how many murders they commit, no matter how much property destruction, no matter how many lives they ruin, their concern is still that there's going to be a retaliation from the right that's going to be a lot worse. But we've already discussed that what they're framing as the right is still the left. And that left, the Nazis and such, they have no power. They are not a threat. The KKK is not a threat to anyone on any scale that we should be concerned with. Okay? Neo-Nazis are not a threat. They just don't have any power. I'm more worried about the communist left. They are the ones that have power. They're the ones that control the corporations and the schools and the news and social media. On a massive scale. It's not even close. So why then would these milquetoast leftists like the Weinsteins be caution against going too far right? Well, it's got nothing to do with actual fear from the right, because they don't have, well, first of all, the right isn't what they're claiming it is, but even the group that they're claiming, they have no power. They're not really a threat. Nobody's going to side with the Nazis. It's not going to happen. Okay? Culture has demonstrated repeatedly that the Nazis are bad. We know this. They've actually failed to explain how the commies are bad. And you might think that's by design. But anyway. So yeah, this is the real problem. And then Allison touched on this when we spoke yesterday about Chloe Roma thing. And this is why I got to bring it back to feminism, because I think that you guys have a better understanding of feminism as a scam, and all these other left-wing activist groups or ideologies, they operate under the exact same model. They honestly do. It's just Cain and Abel. All of them. It's the same story. So if you know that, then it's very clear. It's really clear, which is actually, for my part anyway, I find it to be comforting to know, okay, this is the problem. You can identify it very easily. Okay. So anyway, I'm going to go back to this article, but I just needed to explain that. So D&D publisher Wizards of the Coast is continuing to take steps to eradicate fantasy racism from the popular tabletop game. Fantasy racism. Do you think that leftists think that fantasy racism is really a serious problem that has to be addressed? I mean, I know you guys don't think it's serious. I know you guys don't think that it's important, because you have a normal view of the world, right? But do you think that they think it's important? I'm going to let that sit. I'll come back to it. Dungeons and Dragons has been around for decades, and for several of those decades, it was reliant on an abundance of racial stereotypes to advance storylines and fuel worlds. Long before the appearance of Forgotten Realms' Drizzt Do'Urden, the Dark Elves were heavily laden with the burden of their twisted and evil nature. Among them, an elf-like Drizzt had no place when he came along, because he had a conscience and very little desire to fall in line with their often aberrant practices in the name of lulth and self-advancement. Fantasy races like orcs, half-orcs, and goblins were also branded as evil, as though they're actual living things that don't have a choice but to be branded as evil. perhaps because of their historical relationship to J.R.R. Tolkien's portrayal of them in his fantasy works, which became a cornerstone for the genre. Those races became enemies in the worlds of Dungeons and Dragons, greedy, power-hungry foes who needed to be put down by the heroes of the game before they spread their darkness throughout the land. All right, so really quick, I'll go back to what I was saying before. SJWs, leftists, they don't care about fantasy racism. They don't even care about real racism. They don't. They don't care about racism because they practice it. If we're going to accept any definition of racism that the left is okay with, okay, on any level. So why do they do it? Well, I mean, feminism claims to care about equality between the genders, but they don't, right? They don't, because they openly hate on men. So they don't care about that. And they know it. They know it's a lie. So why do they do it? Well, because it works. It works on you. Because you don't want to be seen as racist, or you don't want to be seen as misogynistic, or you don't want to be seen as homophobic. And of course, the definitions are extreme. They're always moving. They're always changing. They're always expanding. So it's impossible to keep up with, right? Like, seriously, people have lost their jobs over this. People have lost their businesses over this. People have been assaulted over this. People have died over this. And the left knows that this is a lie on some level. And but why do they do it? Because it works. It works on you, right? It's effective. It gives them what they want. What do they want? Well, they want power. And they want power without any obstruction. Well, where would the obstruction come from? Well, obstruction would come from a framework of morality that is universal and identifies evil. So how do they do that? Well, they do it through a multitude of ways. But one way they do it is by saying that there is no such thing as evil. That evil is a childish concept born of religion or something, even though the idea of evil likely existed before religion. Because we had to, if we were going to work together in a cooperative society, figure out what was good for that and what was not good for that, what would be destructive and what would be productive, which means we had to know what evil looks like. And the left erases evil as an idea. Why would they do that? Well, because they're evil. And I know that they're evil because their whole thing is about removing people's individual rights, people's individual way of thinking for themselves, forcing them to conform, using guilt against them to get power for themselves, and then ultimately, like, either imprisoning or murdering people who don't play along with their worldview. And it comes from an idea that the left has, it's a utopian idea, that they understand everything. That they understand exactly what has to happen in order to make the world perfect. That they can do that. And they do that without any consideration that they might be wrong. And then they act on that. And then whatever happens is a necessary consequence of achieving that goal. That is exactly what evil is. Okay? So they do that. And in the context, in the smaller context, because all of these, like with D&D and video games and movies and comics and all this little stuff that's going around, it doesn't matter. Like, you can name it fucking knitting. It doesn't matter, okay? There are leftists trying to bring this shit in there. And the reason is because they're trying to redefine terms to exclude their own evil so you can't see it, okay? So what is it in D&D? This is specific, okay? Like, pointing this out to the left won't matter because they don't care. But you should understand this. In Tolkien's books, because that's where this comes from. Tolkien's books, Lord of the Rings, Silmarillion, whatever. At the center of Lord of the Rings specifically is a story about how absolute power corrupts absolutely, which is what the One Ring is. The One Ring represents power. And the reason that the hobbits even have the ability to carry it is because they have not known power. They were basically a very how do we put it? They were not a great society. They were not a great kingdom. They did not have great vast armies, right? They were simple shire folk, farmers that lived in small communities that did not go out into the world, and like they had no ambition, essentially. Okay. So they could hold on to the ring for periods of time, but eventually the ring corrupts them as well. And so it is a story about power and how the idea being that the smallest people who have the least amount of power can actually change the world. So that it's a story about how grassroots, not movements, because that sounds a little too political, but like grassroots action on the smallest level of community, of family, can actually have the largest, longest lasting impact. And those communities are the largest threat to tremendous power structures, right? Because if you have healthy communities with families and so on, those people will not long for more than that in general, even though eventually they can be corrupted. But it's like the best way to stave that off, okay? So like, what do the orcs represent in the Lord of the Rings? Well, they are basically agents of those who wish to acquire power. And you could say that they're like useful idiots. You could say that they're like a mob. They are the mob, okay? They are, they like the idea of hierarchical structure. They are violent to each other in order to achieve their own piece of power. And apparently they're dangerous enough that, those like that have power, like Sauron and Saruman, they have to lie to the orcs to make sure they don't know about the ring because they fear and distrust each other. So like, that's why orcs are evil. They represent the dark side of humanity. They represent the dark side of us. Like we are always walking close to that idea, as if the paradigm shifts, we can become that. So the left doesn't like the idea that orcs are evil. They don't like Tolkien's work. They don't like that he is actually making this case against totalitarianism. It doesn't matter if it's a dark lord or a communist dictator or a fucking emperor or a president. It doesn't matter what you call it. The point is the structure is there. So this is why they don't like the idea that orcs can be evil, because they resonate with them and they don't want to that exposed. Okay. And I mean, like, I think D&D, in terms of like Wizards of the Coast, they've been slipping in this direction for a while, where they forget that, again, you guys might say, well, it's just a game. And yes, I know all that's true. I know. But there is a symbolism there that was placed there by Gary Gygax that he took from Tolkien. He understood why. Like if you watch Lord of the Rings or read the books and they tell you about orcs or ogres or bugbears or whatever the creature is, whatever the monster is, you have an idea of why they are presented as evil, right? There's a greater thing at play there than simply being like narratively creative and like, oh, I'm going to try something different. Hey, what if the orcs were good? Like that. I mean, that can be fun to play in, but that's not the purpose. Like, you have to understand the symbolism behind evil and why they characterize it in this way. Okay. So fantasy races, I already read this part. So yeah, they don't like Tolkien because he presents good and evil in an objective way, and he's talking about corruption and power. So they have to undo that. Okay. As gamers evolved, so did Dungeons and Dragons. Notice they're using the word evolved, as though gamers were some kind of subhuman chud before Wizards of the Coast came along and started bringing wokeness into the game. Is that an accident? No, these words are very carefully chosen. These people are not stupid. Don't take them for granted. Okay? Because culturally they dominate. So if they're stupid, what does that make you? If you think they're stupid. So as gamers evolved, so did Dungeons and Dragons, and it wasn't long before these enemies became player character options. In D&D 5e offers the opportunity for any player to be a drow, a goblin, an orc, a half-orc, a bugbear, a tiefling, a kobold, or many other races once considered enemies, but playing those races often comes at a cost. Just a really quick comment, tieflings have been available to play as characters since like 3rd edition, but again, my pointing that out would suggest that the writer of this doesn't know D&D, and it's probably because they don't, but that doesn't mean that they're any less of a threat, because most of the people who are pushing for these changes, they don't care about the game. They don't. They want to destroy it. They want to get what they can from it culturally. They're like vampires. They want to draw all of what might be useful to them politically out of it, and they're going to leave behind a desiccated husk that was once D&D. And it's already happening, because I'm not buying any more of these products. I've already said that before. But I want you to know this is happening. Like, it's over. This thing is dead. They're killing it right in front of us. And of course, they've already, so like, you know, the bad stereotypes from Tolkien, that only was limited to orcs. But you see, they've expanded it to everything that could even be considered anything similar, but all of these races are evil. So this is not really about orcs or goblins or kobolds or half orcs or whatever. I mean, half orcs have been playable since the 1st edition. This is about essentially erasing the idea of objective morality. That's what this is about. Like, I'm going to tell you this right now, and I predicted this before, but I'm going to tell you again, okay? They're going to erase alignment itself. So if you play D&D, you know what alignment is. It's basically whether or not you're good or evil or lawful or chaotic. They're going to eliminate alignment altogether. Mark my words, they will. They'll erase the idea of it, flat out. Racial traits include a number of stereotypes that fit in with fantasy world expectations set by past portrayals. Drow must be chaotic evil because it's just how dark elves are, and trusting one would be foolish. Bugbears are noted for fitting into the nightmares of others given their history. Yeah, but you're going into the lore of actual bugbears, not the D&D ones, but whatever. Tieflings are almost always met with mistrust and suspicion given their devilish nature and heritage. Goblins feel bullied as if they have to lash out at the world around them simply because they've always been persecuted. Notice that last one. Goblins feel bullied as if they have to lash out at the world around them simply because they've always been persecuted. What does that remind you of? And again, they know this. This is on purpose. They're trying to remove judgment of themselves because they hate themselves. These player characters start off games meeting overwhelming challenges thrust upon them by an unaccepting imaginary world, not to mention negative racial traits that often put them at a disadvantage. While a lot of that is left up to the Dungeon Master when creating their own worlds to adventure in, many of the Dungeons & Dragons modules have done very little to change those stereotypes for the better, until now. So it seems important to comic book resources, to Wizards of the Coast, and to the wider vocal Twitter Dungeons & Dragons community that these changes happen. Now, I know that some of you might say, if you know what D&D is, well, if you're the DM, then you could just change it back. Or if you're the DM, then you could run the game however you like. And that's true. But do you think that these people want DMs running the game however they want? Do you really believe that? Because I can tell you that they don't. They're going to try to figure out a way to make you play their way. And what's more, even if there's no way for them to do it, okay? Even if it's impossible, why would you continue to support a company that hates you? Don't give money to people who hate you. Don't do it. So this is not even a conversation worth having, right? Like, you can say, yeah, DM, you're just run it the way you want. Why would I give them my money? I'm not going to give them my money anymore. Like, we're done. And you shouldn't either. And yeah, they'll probably go to the state and ask them for fucking kickbacks or whatever, and that's fine. They'll probably just do it that way. But at least you know that you did the right thing. Don't give them your money. They don't deserve it. They hate you. Get that through your head, dude. They hate you. They hate you because they hate each other because they hate themselves. And they just want to burn everything down, ultimately. Do you want everything to be burned down? I don't. So, where was I? To combat many of these stereotypes, Wizards of the Coast has been making efforts to de-emphasize negative racial traits during character creation. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything introduces racial alternatives and new rules that can be incorporated into campaigns. Now, some people have told me that they only put like one page or a very small section. I don't give a shit how big or small it is. I don't care. Don't buy their products anymore. If you want to buy their products, go ahead, but you're actually helping them. You're helping them burn the whole thing down. So maybe stop. Another attempt, though considered half-hearted by many, is the racial revamp of the Vistani in the Curse of Strahd campaign setting. Though some changes were made, critics have argued that many of the characteristics that tie the Vistani to the Romani people still permeate the adventure. There has also been talk of returning to previously published books and adventure modules to modify the racially insensitive material that has plagued them for years. As part of that effort, Wizards of the Coast recently began working with sensitivity readers to preview and help hone the material before its release, which bodes well for the future, not only for old adventurers, but for new ones as well. And this is actually one of their goals. See, the left will burn down culture while using it to indoctrinate young people to become more leftists. This is why. See, if D&D remained like an unpopular and kind of fringe thing, the left probably wouldn't have come for it this hard. It probably would have continued to drift left, but it would have done so slowly. Because the people who worked in the company felt that way, but they would have also been concerned with what their base of consumers, how they might respond. So they'd be careful about drastic changes. But thanks to Critical Role and other mainstreaming of D&D, Stranger Things, whatever, it has gotten the attention of the left, and now they see it as another cultural tool to push their ideas. Which is exactly what they're doing. Now, you might say, I'm a fan of Stranger Things, it's a good show, and I like the Critical Role, it's not bad, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. You can like it, I don't give a shit, but it is contributing to this problem. That is a fact. This is not up for debate, guys. When you mainstream something, you invite the vampires, and the only thing that you need to do is tell them to fuck off, but you didn't. You let them in. So it's over. So thank you, Critical Role. Thank you, fucking Stranger Things. Thanks for the mainstreaming of D&D, because it's dead now. Okay? It is. They're literally going to continue to move this forward until it burns out, and as long as they produce a couple more activists, i.e. people who hate themselves and are nihilistic about the future because they don't have total control over the state and other people's lives, which is what they want. They want more Bolsheviks. Okay? As long as they produce that, they don't give a shit what happens to D&D. They don't give a shit what happens to role-playing as a hobby. They don't give a shit what happens to the video game industry. They don't give a shit about what happens with film. They don't give a shit what happens with fiction. They don't give a shit about any of that. It's just a tool. It's just like the accusation of racism and misogyny and homophobia and Islamophobia and transphobia and whatever. Ableism, it's just a tool. They don't actually care about that stuff. They don't. All right. So let's move on. Because art imitates life and life imitates art, changing the experience for players could potentially change the way those players view the world and interact with others beyond the game. D&D has seen an abundance of new players in the last few years with the popularity of shows like Stranger Things and ongoing online campaigns like Critical Role. They're literally telling you, how they got here. They're telling you this went mainstream because of these things, and now we are marching forward right on through it. And we don't care what happens. Wizards of the Coast, these players bring with them new expectations and experiences to help shape the fantasy worlds in which they play. Wizards of the Coast has always encouraged dungeon masters to make the world their own and run with it. However, notice the however, because you can do it like, you've always had the ability to make the world whatever you want, but this is not what they want. It's not about freedom. That's freedom. A DM that can create his own world and do things however he wants to, that's freedom. That's liberty, right? Within the context of running a game. D&D was the most, role-playing games are probably among the, if not the most, freedom-oriented ways of engaging in fun that have ever existed. There's nothing like them, okay? Nothing. Video games can never get there. They can make them make RPGs that are really deep with lots of choices, but they don't have the freedom that D&D has or other role-playing games have. And they're after that because they hate that. That's why they're after that. Wizards of the Coast has always encouraged dungeon masters to make the world their own and run with it. However, providing good examples to fledgling DMs and players as they launch into exciting new adventures is essential to maintaining the game's long-term popularity. Do you, remember I said at the beginning, I don't give a shit if something is popular? This is the tool by which they're expanding on, essentially they're using this as the tool by which to get into a hobby and try to control it. Well, don't you want it to stay popular? Don't you want people to like it? Why are you being a gatekeeper? Well, yeah, I am a gatekeeper. Get the fuck out of here. You're trying to ruin everyone else's fun. Why, if you don't allow people to be disruptive at your table and you don't think that that's constructive, why would you allow this? I mean, I'm saying you can't. There is no other answer except gatekeep your hobbies. Tell people to fuck off. If they tell you, well, it's just, I just think that there should be more, gay characters. Get out. That's not you. You missed the point completely. You don't understand this at all. If you have a personal identity crisis that you're going through and you think that the best way to live that out is through playing D&D with your wheelchair bound trans dark elf that's lawful good or whatever, or not unaligned, you have some mental disorder, then do that on your own time with your friends and go have fun, because that's the point. That is the point of D&D. But they don't want to do that. They don't want to do that, guys. It's a lie. They want to control you. So don't let them. Okay? This is not about racism or sexism or homophobia or fucking capitalism. It's not about any of that. It's about control. It's about power. It always was. Always. And those assertions are just tools used to serve that power to them. And they will use it against you. And you think that this is I'm being hyperbolic or I'm looking into this too much. You have not been paying attention. You have not been paying attention. Anyway, those are my thoughts on that. I just wanted to get that off my chest. I hope you guys enjoyed the stream. I'm going to take a look at your comments really quick, see if anything interesting was said. And if you tag me in something, then maybe I'll look at it. So, Richard Bier, are you old enough to remember when D&D was considered a gateway to satanic practices? Yeah, but you know what? That's not nearly as bad as this. It's not even close. I'm not even going to make the satanic panic comparison, because that comparison is made usually to try to appeal to moderate leftists. Oh, look, guys, this is just as bad as this. It's not even close. Not even close. Because there was not a massive movement that had influence in the media, in academia, in the fucking on the internet, which the internet didn't exist, but even still it wouldn't be there. The massive platform of people that are after D&D right now, it doesn't even come close to like a few pearl clutching religious people. My mom was actually among them, right? She was like, oh, you know, I don't think you should be playing that game. Like, you know, I think it could be satanic. And I would just tell her, no, like, you know, you fight against evil in this game. Like I was trying to rationalize it, right? And she didn't like that I was playing it, but she never took them from me. She never said I couldn't do it. She just expressed concern, right? That's not what this is. It's not even close, guys. Like Jack Thompson, you know, having problems with violent video games, you could make that comparison. Maybe he did it for religious reasons, or he was like, let's think of the children or whatever. But to say that it's like anything like a mirror to this shit, it's not even close. Because these people are exercising power. They're actually coming in and taking our like hobbies from us. This isn't like the conservatives never did that. They never did that. At least not on a massive scale, and they don't even have the power to do that. Do you see the difference? It's not even close, guys. Zerang says, so wokeists were saying something when they said orcs were depictions of certain people. No, they were just using it as it's a tool. They don't care about racism. They don't care about that. It's a tool. If you accept any of their premises, even if you're using their premises to debunk them, you're giving them what they want. You're engaging in the conversation on their terms. Seeking Origin, it's not just a game, it's culture. People use culture as a conduit to lend their consent to authority, influence the culture, taste the power, hijack the culture. Yeah, well, that's why they use culture. It's the best way to, it's the best path forward to political control. They use the culture and they use education. And when you mix them together, I mean, it's a deadly combination. All right. Teal Deer, things like this are why I'm basically 100% checked out of any and all pop culture. Yeah, I used to think that D&D was not pop culture. I mean, like, I think that even like Warhammer 40,000 has gotten the fucking cancer. And that's probably the most anti-woke world that ever existed. Teal Deer says, I keep up with news out of necessity. Otherwise, I ignore everything that isn't my home, garden, pets, friends, and family. Well, that's good. Yeah, definitely. Like I do the same. Like I keep a close-knit group of friends that I regularly communicate with. I try to build community in where I am now. Like there are these guys at the gun store that I visited twice now, and I'm excited to see them again because they're sane. Like they're sane. You know, and I know that things are just going to continue to slide into the abyss more and more. And the sad part is that I have very old friends that I've known for a long time that they're so dependent on this pop culture shit that they're just going to forgive everything. And I'm just not, I'm not that desperate to be entertained. I'm just not. I'm fine, guys. Teal Deer says, I've been here since, Wild Deer appears. Yeah, that's true. If you guys have any comments you want me to read, just tag me, because I don't have any super chat abilities, because YouTube doesn't like me for some reason. Not that I don't know. Oh, thank you, Syntax. Reunification Syntax donated to the Blood Gods. Thank you. I used to speak to a guy from Norway that liked to LARP D&D. I wonder if the wokes have destroyed that. Oh, I think in LARPing is where it started. I could tell you, like, there was always a little bit of wokeness in role-playing games because most people who play RPGs they tend to be liberal-minded, which means that they accept a little bit of wokeness, right? Like some sort of mainstream normie assumptions about society. But when LARPing came into being as a popular thing, which I think started with Vampire the Masquerade, That's when the wokeness came in, because, and I hate to say this, but it was when women got involved in, because before there were always women playing D&D, but when women that were getting into D&D, it was because they were a little bit different. Like Hannah, she's kind of masculine brained woman, right? So people like that, like women that get involved with D&D and other tabletop games, they're already sort of outcasts compared to other women. They're misfits, right? And so that works. But when you started the LARP, you started getting like the fucking BPD attention whore women that they weren't interested in the highly tactical, mathematically focused tabletop gaming where you had to roll d20s and add things and look at charts and all that. They didn't want to do that. They wanted to dress up like goths and like pretend to be vampires and, you know, and like basically make everything about them, which is why I never got into LARPs, because they just seem to be like narcissist playgrounds. But I think that's when it started, honestly. I think that's what, or at least when the ball really got going was around that time, which would be the 90s. So Zerank says, my orcs comment was regarding your statement about orcs being tools for, I forget exactly what you said. Orcs are, oh, you mean tools for power? Yeah, so like they are useful idiots. Like if you wanted to make real world parallels, Antifa thugs are basically the orcs of the state. They basically create chaos. They burn down businesses. They destroy property and they hurt people. And they do it to frighten people in line. Okay. Basically the threat of violence from them is, and violent Black Lives Matter activists. It doesn't really matter. Violent activists, mobs, they represent, that's what orcs represent, right? You know, Tolkien has said in many interviews that he wasn't trying to draw any parallels to anything. And I think it was because he didn't want his work to be seen as a political thing, which I understand and respect, because it isn't. It is a human story. He's basically talking about something that is much bigger than whatever the current politics of the time were. That's why. But if you don't think that the story of the One Ring is at all related to anything that is in its own way political, at least in a philosophical sense, yeah, that you're wrong, because it's absolutely what it's about. And you can see it. I mean, I don't even know if Peter Jackson knew it. It's sort of like, you know, Paul Verhoeven's take on Starship Troopers shows that Paul Verhoeven doesn't understand Starship Troopers. He didn't understand the book. So, all right, a couple more comments and then I'm going to close it out because I'm hungry. Warp Reflection says, people just laughed at the religious conservatives trying to censor stuff back in the 80s and 90s. People allow the woke to destroy what they love. Yes, it's not even close. Not even. Like if some religious conservative or whatever comes out and they say, I don't like this thing, most of us just, okay, I don't give a shit. Like, you know, it's not going to change anything. But what is worth pointing out is that religious conservatives also don't seem to want to force themselves on people, at least not on a massive scale. You might find individuals like, you know, a parent that says, I forbid you to do this thing, or a preacher that a pastor that tells people that they should do that with their children. But in terms of actually like levying the power of the state against people or the power of the mob against people, that doesn't really happen. And if there are religious people that are worth their salt, they would know why. Because doing the right thing, whatever that might be, even if you're wrong about what the right thing is meaningless if it's not a voluntary choice made by the person trying to do the right thing. So forcing someone to do the right thing is not the right thing because they didn't choose, because you forced them. That's why taxation is not charity, because taxation is forced. So how can it be charity? Nobody has a choice. This is the reason why in the United States, statistically, people on the right donate more to charity than people on the left. Well, why is that? Well, because leftists don't believe that charity is effective. They believe in taxation. So, all right. Anyway, troll with a purpose. Oh no, Brian gonna be canceled like Jeremy. What happened to Jeremy? Okay, I think you guys are talking to each other now. Troll with a purpose says, if anything religious were just no step, stay away from my kids. The left is we own your kids. Yes, that's right. So anyway, I'm gonna wrap it up there. Thanks guys for coming on and listening to my TED Talk. I hope that you guys understand why this is important. I know this is just about D&D, but there is something much larger at play, and this is just another attack on the culture. So thank you guys so much for coming on today's show, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video. I'll see you later on today with a new show.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.